So let's talk about color grading, color correction, and color grading. This is going to be a tool you guys use to not only adjust the color in your footage, but to also give it a mood. So color correction, we can define more as correcting the color of the footage to match real life, because your camera might not pick up and it might sort of desaturate some colors or hypersaturate some colors. Your camera might not pick up the colors that are true to our eye. So color correction is adjusting that so the footage reflects what we can see in real life. Color grading is going to be sort of like, I would compare it to adding like a filter, creating a mood through further color editing. So we're going to go through a broad scope of both, are combined through the color editing workspace. So start with going to your menu, window, workspaces, color. And I have 3 clips here that are all very different. So I have this sort of desaturated, cloudy fall scene, this like very vibrant sunset, and then just kind of like a more in between. I'm going to start with color correcting, just the basic correction. So lumetri color is, this panel is going to show up when you open that color workspace, and I'm going to start with color correction, making sure my clip is selected. So we can open this up just a bit, and we can use some of the presets. We can use the auto adjust and adjust the intensity of that. But what I want you guys to do instead is manually adjust your color or correct your color. So first you're going to want to always correct your white balance, and you click that little eyedropper, or the eyedropper tool, and you select where you think the whitest of the whites are. So that's about right. I can always reset that. And you see that I lost a bit of that sort of cool tone when I adjust my white balance, and it gets just a tad whiter. So I'm going to leave it there. We can also adjust the temperature, the tint, the saturation. Temperature is going to influence your highlights and shadows a lot. For this scene, it's very white and desaturated, so let's go over to this clip here. This is a great example because it's a very warm feeling to this with the colors. So I can adjust the color temperature down, and that sort of makes it more like bland. So I'm using these cool tones on top of these beautiful, rich, warm sunset tones to sort of like wash it out. And then, of course, the opposite is going to make it feel intense and hot. And you see this a lot in like professional films, that they use color temperature to enhance or dehance certain subjects or environments, or whatever they're trying to show off or hide. So this temperature here, we'll make it the oranges more intense, and this will make the teals more intense. So let's set that back to 0 and go back to our regular clip. So I can make it feel kind of like a warm day. Maybe this kind of looks like sunset, or I can make it feel cold, like a cold winter morning. Let's make it a little warm. Actually, let's just change it so you can see the change, and then reset it so we can move on to the next adjustment. You can see that. So tint, this is going to adjust your green and magenta. Probably not going to mess with the tint too much, but of course it's going to give it a sort of, I wouldn't call magenta like a warm, or like a warm, magenta is a warm color, but it isn't the first color you think of when you think of temperature warm. You know, you think of like oranges and reds, and magenta almost has that like neutrally sort of feel, and same with green. So this is of course like another color correction that you might not use, but can definitely influence the mood. And then moving on to saturation, this will bring your footage from, or image, to monochrome, to, you know, highly chromatic. This of course is very influential to your feeling of the footage, or like, you know, how you're viewing this and what emotion you're trying to show through your editing. So if I bring up the saturation, this feels like rich and full of life. If I bring this down, it feels, you know, dreary. And then if I bring it even further, you know, this is black and white, and this is like old film. So it has its own sort of connotations between, you know, depending on what saturation level you're choosing to utilize. All right, so that is color. Then we have in the light, exposure, which is how light or dark your footage will be. The contrast, the sort of difference between the lightest parts and the darkest parts. You see I bring that contrast down, it sort of washes it out, and this intensifies it. High contrast is could make it potentially look sort of fake. And low contrast, of course, like make it washed out and dull and lifeless. You know, not necessarily a bad thing, but of course it's just the mood you're going for. Highlights are going to accentuate or sort of strengthen or dull those lightest parts of your footage, everything except for the whites, really. So if I adjust my highlights here, and then I can also adjust my whites too. You see that's a different slider, so let's play with that. You see my whites sort of get blown out, and now they're sort of gray when I lower that. Same with shadows and blacks. I can intensify those blacks. I can bring out those shadows so everything feels darker. And I can bring up my shadows so those blacks still remain, but it sort of washes out the rest of the shadows, or like the darker side of your footage. So that is it for basic correction. You can turn on and off, so let's add a couple edits here. That looks good. You can turn on and off those corrections all with these check boxes. So you can go back and see, oh, that's what it looked like originally. And then there's my adjustment. Okay, so we'll go briefly through these. We have our creative panel, which again, we can apply a sort of, you know, what I would call a filter, or, you know, look of these pre-selected cameras. So it's sort of like this is a filter essentially. Again, I can adjust the intensity, but I don't want to do that, and I don't want you guys to do that because I want you to do your own. Color balance and color grading. So we can make this look, here in the adjustments we can use faded film. Of course that gives you a faded film look. We can sharpen. This makes your edges harsher or harder, whereas if we lower the sharpen, it blurs. Adding too much sharpness, this will enhance detail, but or adding sharpness will enhance detail, but too much sharpness will sort of make it look like fake. So just like be gentle with the sharpen. And then vibrance, this will adjust saturations in your midtone. So you see my back here, these trees sort of get very bright, and then I lower it, but I don't lose complete color. Like, there's still color to this footage, right? But it's not vibrant. And then again, I can adjust the saturation. And then another thing that's really cool is we can adjust the shadow tint and the highlight tint. So let's turn this into a warm scene. Maybe I'll do something like that, like this yellow for a shadow. Actually, let's do a blue for the shadow. And for the highlights, we'll do a bright orange. And you'll see the lightest parts of my footage turned orange and the darkest parts turned blue. I can also adjust which way I want that to lean into. So it still remains orange, but it's kind of like more heavy on the shadow. And there's still that blue tint there, but it's heavy on the highlight. So that's it for creative. We also have curves, which I don't want to get too into, but this allows you to adjust the red, green, and blue levels of your footage all at once. And even further, we can adjust the hue versus saturation, hue versus hue, hue versus luma, luma versus saturation, saturation versus saturation. But just if you are going to be editing with the curves, I would suggest just using the general RGB curves, and you'll see this line that goes across this grid. What we can do, and I have white selected here, so let's go over to, actually let's start with white. This line going across, we can take this cursor, which turns into a little pen tool, and we can start to drag our curve in different ways to make adjustments to the saturation, the contrast, and so on. So let's start with maybe a red, and this affects all the reds, and then the greens. Oh, I'm going to select the blue. So another way to edit colors through our curves. I'm just going to turn that off. I'm going to skip color wheel and match for the very end of this tour. So we'll move into HSL secondary, which is hue, saturation, hue, saturation, and luminance. But this is a great way to replace colors. So what I'm going to do is grab this eyedropper tool and let's select the greens. I'm going to do that, make sure I have that. I'm just clicking and dragging, and that's good. Let's turn all these green to maybe like an orange or a red. And so I have that selected, and I can go down to correction, and I just grabbed an orange over here. So then you saw immediately those greens turn to that orangey red. To add colors to be further changed to this orange, I can grab the eyedropper tool and the plus sign. Oops. Undo. And select more of those greens. And I think I'll zoom in just a bit here. And that's pretty good. You can also do this a similar effect with like masking, but let's go back and let's blur this out just a bit. And maybe we'll lower that sort of intensity of the correction. Maybe change it to like, let's make blue trees. So I can make it really intense. Maybe they're purple trees. That doesn't look very realistic, obviously, but turn it down. Let's go back to orange. And then I can also adjust the color, how warm or cool. So when I take it very cool, it sort of like neutralizes all that color out to this like murky brownish. And then especially like lowering the saturation of that correction. And then I can also, sharpen this. So the leaf, you see those leaves with it, I increase the sharpness, the leaves sort of pop out more. Where I lower the sharpen, it sort of blends in. And then we can increase saturation. We can also adjust those highlights and shadow tints here too. So I can make it even more intense by making sure that my all midtones, shadows, and highlights are, whatever color I want it to change to. And yeah, so and if I don't like some of my selection, I can use that eyedropper with the minus tool and get rid of some of these colors. I can also use some of the preset colors like red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and directly replace those colors on this HSL secondary editing option. So yeah, this is a great way to replace color. Vignette, most of us probably know what a vignette is. It is sort of like a dulling of the outside edges of a photo or footage. And that way we're focusing on just the center. So let's turn off that and we're back to the original. So let's talk about color wheel and match. This is going to allow you to match the colors from one footage to another. So I'm going to select the comparison view, and then your left is going to be your reference footage, your right is going to be the footage you're editing. And I'm going to use this this arrow just to go to the next footage. You can see I can cycle through the sunset and the window scene. So let's start with the sunset. I want to take these colors and bring them into this to match the mood. We can go apply match. Okay. And then it's bringing those colors into this world. Let's undo that. Let's try this guy. Apply match. And then you saw it sort of intensified, brought out the blacks, just like in this footage, and higher, like raised the contrast. I think what would be cool is if we take this sort of neutral, make sure that's selected. Maybe let's apply the sunset over here. So immediately, same warmth, vibrancy, And still, like, because their blacks are so rich, we're still like keeping that higher contrast, higher shadow content. Let's go undo. Let's try this. So brought those colors in, but still kind of feels a little dull on this scene with that color match, because this is a very sort of dull scene. Great, so let's just apply one of these filters, and we're going to close comparison view. We have one of these corrections, these auto corrections provided by Adobe to simulate or emulate a film on top of this window scene. So say I want to take this effect and I want all my footage to have the same color correction. What I can do is, in my effect control panel, copy my color effect, select the footage I want to donate it to, and then paste. So then there it is. If I want to delete it, I can just right click that and clear. Cool. So let's clear everything. And the last bit I want to go over is in the effects window, we can use some of these presets, just like our transitions and audio effects that we've already done. You just click and drag them in. You can see a preview next to them. And then your effect and color correction is done. And again, if I want to delete some of these, clear. But pretty quick tour and overview of color correction and grading. Yeah, awesome.